Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today we're putting the Tonearm's needle on Toronto saxophonist Patrick Smith. Patrick's become a key player in the city's creative music scene, and his new album, Words Underlined, came out in December on Lit Soc Records. It's the first release from the new label started by Sellers Newell, a Toronto bookstore that moonlights as a music venue. Patrick recorded there with guitarist Dan Pitt and drummer Lowell Whitty. The trio works without a bass, and the album mixes compositions with full improvisations. A few episodes back, we featured a talk with Noah Franche-Nolan, who also collaborated with Dan Pitt. A link to that conversation, as well as my November 2024 interview with Dan, are both in the show notes. Patrick's here to talk about making music in the trio format, the Toronto music scene, and why a bookstore was the right place to record. So now, Patrick Smith. You've been working in various contexts and leading different types of ensembles for, a bit now. And I'm curious what the genesis story is of the trio with Dan and Lowell, and sort of what's the attraction for you of that particular ensemble?
I think for me, the genesis of it was, myself and Dan had a similar trio years and years previous, sax, drums, and guitar, no bass. I'm quite the fan of the Paul Motian recordings that have no bass with Bill Frisell and Joe Lovano, and the later ones with Jason Moran and Chris Potter. So, initially I put a Paul Motian show together and we played some of the music of Paul Motian with those guys. And Lowell had been on a previous release of mine, a trio recording, and I've worked with him quite a bit. I've played in his brass band, Heavyweights brass band, a number of times, and I really love the way he plays drums. And I felt that, early on in his career, he had more opportunities to play more open improvisatory music, while as now less so the way his career has gone, but he really loves it. And I feel somewhat similar myself of just at the onset of my career, I played a lot more of that music than I do now. And now when I make the time for that music, it's often my own projects. My recorded output reflects heavily on that sort of tradition coming out of Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, and the free jazz movement of the 60s. But with what I do on a day-to-day basis, less so. So I enjoyed that show so much. And I really think that, Dan is one of the few guitarists that I have access to in Toronto that can really navigate the world of no bass player effectively. A lot of people can't do it. He really is a master of tone on the guitar. And that was the genesis where we played this gig doing the music of Paul Motian, and I enjoyed it so much. And I had some, sketches and old compositions that had never been recorded that I thought were good, that would work well here. So then we did another show where we included some of my material with the Paul Motian stuff. And it went really well. And I felt that we should go ahead and record it and just get something recorded, because we had done I think there's been too many times in my professional life of the last 10, 12 years where there's been either my own project or somebody else's project where it lasts for 2 years. There's a bunch of really great shows, and then it kind of dissipates and there's no recorded output. So I was pretty eager to get something recorded of it because I thought the group sounded very strong. And I thought in terms of my own recorded output, I had a quintet release. I had a quartet release that was a somewhat co-led thing with Mark Shim with vibraphone that was also sort of in this free jazz-ish world. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a nice foil to what I had already recorded that kind of represented a different side of me, where a lot of my previously recorded material was all fairly intense stuff. And I think for the most part, this band, I can play I can flex sort of the softs and the louds of my expression abilities on the saxophone, which is what I really like. And it's open, while as a lot of my other previous bands and releases, everything was very more planned out, room for solos. But this, all the charts are one page for the most part. And that was kind of the genesis of it. Was I really wanted to, get back into this world that I hadn't been super involved with the last few years. And, I really am fascinated by the trio format, even though it's very hard. And I now have 2 releases with 2 different trios, and it's very hard to get right. And I really am marvel at the great trios across all of music history. And despite how hard it is, I keep coming back to the trio format in a variety of ways as the most rewarding and challenging for me.
I love that comment about the trio format being hard. And I'm curious, is it specifically about like the trio and with the absence of a true cordless instrument, without the bass, or like, what is it about is it all trios? What is it?
I mean, I think it's all trios. Like, the music I recorded with my cordless trio with Chris Banks and Lowell Whitty that I released 2 singles off of and a video off of. I really love Sonny Rollins. I really love his recordings that have no chord instrument. And it is very, very hard to do well.
Yeah.
And to the point where I didn't release everything from the recording I made because I wasn't happy with with how it turned out. Like, in some ways, even a duo is easier to navigate musically than a trio. And I don't know what it is about the number 3. I would say like everybody has to inhabit more roles. When you have a quartet or a quintet, everybody has their own specific role. But a trio, everybody has to kind of inhabit a variety of roles to make it work, and navigating that fly can be hard.
I love that. So that's really illuminating. So I appreciate that color. And I wanted to just ask you along those lines a couple of follow-up questions about the actual musicians in this trio, because you telling me that really helps me understand a little bit about why it works so well with Dan in particular, because of the way he plays and his use of electronics and texture. Makes a lot of sense to me that he can fill a lot of roles and space. I'm curious how much, you talked about Dan as a player and the things that attract you to him, but I'm also wondering if his use of like that expanded palette is important in this context as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think I find a lot of guitar players, it's very hard to have a serious sound concept through pedals and through your clean tone on guitar. And I think the thing that attracts me to musicians is tone. Dan has spent a long time really fine-tuning every aspect of his sound. So every time he goes to use a sound through his pedals, through a straight tone, every single tone he has is incredibly well thought out. And to my ears, I can tell where, he's really over the years honed in what pedals he uses. He doesn't use that many. His rig is very small, but he really knows how to use those pedals that he have. I also use pedals sometimes, and I really marvel talking to him about it, because that Strymon Blue Sky pedal he knows every possible way. He has listened to such a wide variety of guitar tones that every single sound he uses is great. And, especially as a saxophone player, like that tone is everything to me. And that's what attracted me about saxophone. And I think the reason Dan is successful in this format is because he really understands tone. And in this recording, I think in particular, the recording engineer, the brilliant Tom Upjohn, who recorded it, suggested, hey, bring both your Princeton reverb amps, bring both them. We're going to record guitar in stereo. So we recorded it in stereo, and Tom, the engineer, brought a little chorus pedal. So the 2 amps have a slight little phase to them that it sounds unbelievable.
Yeah, that opens it up big.
Yeah, it opens it up fully. And I usually prefer piano in my bands, and just Dan, for me, like his mastery of tone on the guitar, unparalleled. And that's why I like playing with him so much, is because it forces me to really make sure that I am thinking about my sound, which, especially in a more open context, it's everything.
Yeah. I really appreciate you going under the hood with me on some of this stuff. I love these type of explorations.
I do too. Yeah.
And what about Lowell? Like, you mentioned earlier that I'm going to badly paraphrase you, but essentially this record is a chance for him to flex muscles that you knew he had, but he's not always flexing. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, and I mean, Lowell's played on so many recordings, really so many recordings in his life. He is more known as a guy who can play the funkier side of things, and particularly he came up when he was quite young. He was in a fairly famous Toronto Dixieland band playing trad jazz. So he is really deeply versed in that world as well. Like, cause, you know, from the time he was like 17 to 22, he played and toured doing that. Like while he was in school, he was playing with this band, the Happy Pals. And I think him understanding that, as well as he really understands the entire history of jazz drumming and really listens well. And, you know, is the type of drummer that's very intuitive that you don't have to tell a whole lot to. And his groove and his sense of pulse and swing is unbelievable. Like, you know, particularly the band he plays in, the Heavyweights Brass Band, I think they're like, in my opinion, they're the band in Canada, can kind of do the, like his drum feel sounds like these New Orleans drummers. Like he actually has it down, which for me, a lot of drummers, when they play that way, it's very stiff and there's no swing and push and pull to it. But his
academic.
Yeah. And in any context he has, there's just this sense of swing, regardless of what he's playing, right? Where like he pushes and pulls tempos, even the way his snare hits, like there's just this deeply ingrained sense of swing and pulse, where how that translates for me is like, okay, in a band like this, where, you know, this record goes between like, there's a tune that's basically metal, there's a tune that's swing, where I'm like thinking about Lester, you know, okay, let me like take this kind of Lester Young type approach, but like reimagine it in the modern context, to like just totally open stuff where Lowell is coloring, where he's listened to all those Paul Motian records and he understands, you know, how to get the overtones out of the cymbal properly and use his sense of pulse within that context where there's no meter, on just using pulse to color what we're doing. I think it's brilliant. And I think it comes from the fact that he has played he's done so much in his career that he is able to approach, you know, more open music and jazz with this really informed mindset. He's willing to take risks, and all the while it's incredibly funky and groovy. Like that's the best way I have to describe it. Particularly the way he hits the cymbal, I find. I think he's an amazing drummer.
It's interesting because to hear you speak about both of your bandmates, you're really talking about two people that have mastery over the tools, like the instruments and the tools themselves, and know what they're doing and how to get what they want to achieve the sound and the contribution that they need to make in any given moment. And I wonder, how do you fit into that? Do you view yourself also as sort of proficient as a technician with your instrument and your tool?
Yeah, I would say that. I think, you know, sometimes I wonder if I have focused too much on the development of myself as a saxophone player, rather than when I was a younger musician. I was perhaps too focused on that side of things, where, you know, I would consider myself a fairly serious technician on the horn. There's a lot of stuff I can execute. And oftentimes I have to, you know, I have to remove myself from the saxophone player and access the musician, because it can be hard to do, especially I think the whole history of the saxophone. There's a lot of baggage trying to follow in the footsteps of people like Charlie Parker and Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane, who just so much is made of just what they can execute in terms of the pure instrumental level they're on, right? Sometimes as saxophone players, we can get caught up in that. I would say with Dan and Lowell, like they are very serious technicians on their instruments, but for me, when I hear the word technician, I think of somebody, you know, got crazy chops, like crazy chops. I wouldn't describe any of us as having crazy chops. I would I think all of us have really delved into sound and tone in particular, right? Into technicians of tone.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Even like, I mean, like all three of us are, I think, are pretty neurotic about even just like the gear we play in very different ways. Yeah, all three of us can be very particular. I mean, you know, Lowell has quite a few ride cymbals, and he spends a lot of time thinking about what is the right ride cymbal for recording, what is the right snare. He has a couple different snares, you know. Dan Dan has a custom the guitar he's playing on this recording is my favorite guitar of his. It's this custom made guitar that was made for him by a guy, and he has a few other ones, and I just love this sound of this one guitar so much. And then on my end, you know, this marks the first recording where I played the same American type saxophone and old Con for 8 years, and then I finally came around, and I'm now playing a Selmer, which is the vintage saxophone most people play. And this was the first recording I used it on, and it was interesting because I think when I got these rough mixes back, I feel that I might not like this one as much, but it allows me to be me quicker, right? So purely in terms of a tone concept, where I guess I would describe us as technicians of tone, with the way all three of us think. I think for most of us, yeah, I think all three of us, our primary focus is sound.
You know, it's really funny. I was out for brunch yesterday with my partner, and she and I went to there's a place near us that has, it's actually a beautiful little venue, but on Sundays, it's brunch combined with sort of like an open mic concept. So there's a piano on the stage, and you can go up, and if you sing or play, you know, and not a lot of people do, but there was a young man yesterday, and I think I heard him tell somebody he was 20, but he was certainly much younger. And he was at the piano playing very fast, you know, and he would like play a little bit of a riff from a recognizable piece and then just improvise. My girlfriend said to me, she's like, this guy's good, but I don't like this. And I said, he's amazing technically. He's got zero emotion. Like he's just showing off, or he's just trained, but he just does. There's nothing to grab onto. Couldn't play a ballad to save his life, but you know, executing fast, can play up and down the keyboard.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating when you're faced with that and you can recognize it. When you're writing for a trio like this, you mentioned, you know, you had the Paul Motian songbook and exploring that songbook sort of merged into you composing also for that type of format. I'm curious, this is an assumption more than anything else. You have to think specifically about that format, right? Like you know, it's a very specific arrangement. Can you take other parts of your songbook and apply it to this type of format, or do you have to write for this format?
I mean, I applied other parts of my songbook to this format.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this record is a mix of compositions and improvisations. That's what I wanted this band to be. I wanted to be like, hey, can we like do a set where we improvise and then cue into something? I think for myself as a composer, I'm kind of more going towards this world of, okay, I think I can write songs and I can write compositions, right? So if I write a song, usually I should be able to fit everything on one sheet, 2 max, right? And I should be able to play it in a variety of contexts, right? In a variety of instrumentations, you know?
Right.
If we think about the great songs from, you know, if we're talking about songs, you know, I think of people like, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with like those late Johnny Cash records, particularly. There's one called My Mother's Hymn Book.
Oh, sure.
Where it's just Johnny Cash singing solo with guitar songs out of his mother's hymn book. You know, I love that recording because like those are songs, right? You could play that with those songs with any instrumentation, with any arrangement, and they would still work, right? A lot of those Beatles tunes feel like that, you know. Within the jazz context, I mean, if you play like any of those Wayne Shorter tunes, you can play them duo. They'll still work. You can figure out a way to do it duo in addition to like the way they were originally meant, which is, you know, a larger ensemble, a quintet. So with this record, I looked at some stuff, some songs I had, some compositions and songs I had that I had not yet recorded. And I was like, okay, well, why not? Let's just let's see if this works. And I thought about it. I'm like, I think this will work. It might not be in the way that I imagined it, but I think this will work. So the compositions on this record, we're essentially playing them as tunes, with the exception of Banff. They're not part heavy. And then I think those compositions allowed us, and I kind of said on the session, when we're going to do these improvised pieces, let's keep in mind the composition, the tunes we've already recorded of mine, right? Where, at the time of this recording, I was coming off a really insane period of just busyness. All three of us were. We kind of rehearsed a couple things before we started recording, but then we just started recording. I didn't think this record would turn out this good. I thought maybe I would get like a single and I could use the recordings to apply for a grant to do it properly. We did this session at the Bookstore, and it, because the room sounded good and the guy recording us knew what he was doing, it turned out very well. And I'm really proud of the record.
Well, the playing must have been pretty good too.
The playing was pretty good. And I think because all of us were so tired, it was like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. We haven't rehearsed these tunes. Yeah. Whatever. It's fine. We can finish.
I love that.
But so
the looseness.
The four tunes on the record were, in some cases, they're like, two of them are like 7, 8 years old. The other two I had written in the last year. And the two old ones, I was like looking at like some songs and I'm like, oh, I wish I had recorded this song. It's like, okay, well, why not try it in this format? These guys are good. I'm sure we can figure it out. And they turned out great. But yeah, so I should probably be thinking about writing for this format, but I also think part of the beauty and hardness of a trio is because there's less moving parts, you can kind of make a wide variety of things work.
The Tonearm will be right back after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find new profiles of Australian sound artist and curator Lawrence English, late Kenyan musical legend Joseph Kamaru, influential modern classical innovator Fausto Romatelli, French shoegaze band Wavepool, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to the Tonearm. I want to talk a little bit about the Bookstore. Lots of people in the Toronto scene have played at Sellers and Newell. I'm curious how this project came to be sort of catalog number one on their label.
I think I just got to the end of the process first.
You crossed the finish line?
I think I just happened to be the first one where it got set, where he released three records at around the same time. I think mine was the first one that was recorded there. I might be wrong. I would have to talk to Peter, but it was one of the first sessions where I had talked to him about using the space. And I mean, this is the second record I've done not in a studio live off the floor. The record I released at the beginning of last year, this, fusion record, Pangea Rebirth, was done to tape without headphones on in a basement. And it also turned out very well, where, I've done this without grant support. So the studio route is I find it very expensive on both like paying for the studio and getting in there and then also mixing it. It's great because you get to create a mix from the ground up, but I'm also not the one mixing it. I am kind of skeptical of studios for jazz because all of my favorite jazz recordings, nobody was wearing headphones and they were all in the same room. I think the next one I do, my full length quintet thing that I've had done for years that I need like some funding to do it. I need that to be done in a studio. But with this, I was like, well, why don't we just record in this Bookstore? Like, if I don't like it, I'll release a single, and then I'll have another release. And like, Peter was nice enough to lend us the space. And then I think after a couple people had started recording there, he got this idea of like, well, what if I started a record label? I think he was every time I would see him, if I would go see a show, I had a gig there. It took a year between recording and release, and it was on track to be a bit longer. And he sort of brought up like, well, I can help out with the cost of the CDs if you'd like to be on the label. And I said, well, that would be great. That would allow this to get done this year and not next year. So that's how it came to be, where it wasn't initially, he had come up with this idea after we recorded it, but he was at the session and was blown away by it and really wanted it out in the world. So he was like, okay, well, what else needs to be done? I was like, well, I need to get the money together for publicity and CDs. He offered to help with the cost of that on his label.
Beautiful.
We came to an agreement. He took a number of CDs to sell. We have a meeting. Maybe I shouldn't be sharing this information, but that's how it came about. Where working with him, where he's just been so generous with his space over the years, and he's had a fascinating life where he had essentially in retirement he is he had a whole other career that he started a second career when he retired from his first career running this bookstore in the West End, and now he runs a record label as well, and he deals rare books, and it's quite remarkable that he puts on 20 shows a month.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it kind of started from the first Paul Motian show we did. It wasn't at the bookstore. It was at a bar called the Eminent Ray, and Peter came to the show, and he was like, "Man, I would really love it if you guys did this. If you guys do another day, I would love to present it at the store." And then we did it at the store, and yeah, playing Paul Motian tunes in a tiny bookstore instead of a bar, or a traditional venue, felt it's so intimate. It's and the music's intimate in itself, and it was beautiful. And then when it came time to record, and he had started, offering the space after hours for musicians to record, because the whole, in this day and age, it's very hard to find a space to record. And I think this record's a good example of, how doing it DIY can work for certain projects, right? Where this one, the DIY method on this record turned out amazing. In some ways, I'm happier with how this sounds than stuff I did at really expensive studios, because Tom Upjohn, they are a genius. And I got the rough mix back, and I couldn't believe it. And Tom's like, yeah, the way we set it up, it turned out well. The space, we talked about it ahead of time of how to make it work. And you can't essentially, you need to just get the room sound proper and then mix minimally. You can't change the entire vibe of a mix, but the way Tom did it, I cannot believe how the quality of sound I got out of this. And Justin Graham, who mastered it, is also brilliant. It's funny. Yeah. Now I have 2 albums that I've recorded with no headphones on that I think are great, that I think the tone quality, it's not up to the same level as if I'd done it in a studio, but I think it's pretty close. And for me as an independent artist, partnering with Peter, a small label, it really kind of gives me faith about the future of music in this day and age, and of creative instrumental music in particular.
That's right. And if you can pair that with the ability to tap into the grant process that seems, quite frankly, a bit unique to Canada right now, certainly in North America, that paints a potential path forward for creative music.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the grant process in Canada in recent years, well, mostly in the province I live in Ontario, it has gotten a lot harder, where there is less funding for it. But I'm hopeful, with a collaboration like this, I do think it has a better chance of getting some funding. And yeah, it makes me hopeful, because next album I do, I would really, it's these partnerships, that make music happen, or a lot of money, which for more on the more creative side of things is hard,
It's interesting that you recorded in a place where you've both played in front of audiences and recorded after hours. How does the audience and lack thereof impact you at all? Or was this just, you go in with a different mindset? You're almost approaching we're going into the studio. It's just not a studio. But and why not in front of an audience?
Well, I mean, it's really nice to be able to stop if something goes wrong, which happened. Yeah. That happened a couple of times. And in terms of how we set up this pretty small room, we were spaced out. There was some baffling happening with, just some basic stuff and moving blankets. Tom had gotten there a couple hours before and set it up the way he thought it was going to work. Yeah, I think the live recording thing is very hard. I mean, I just did a live recording where if I don't get some funding, I think I will release a couple tracks off of it. But yeah, just there's mistakes in some of the tracks. So I guess the benefit of doing it without an audience there is that you can stop and talk about some stuff and listen back. And,
yeah.
Where for me, it feels like a studio, Except for, I've always felt that the studio thing, I have a hard time with it because I didn't do enough of it when I was coming up and super young. And like, I now am good at going to a studio environment because it's cold, like, especially when you're in separate rooms, the headphones on. I got a lot more experience of it. I like, if I had gotten a lot of experience doing it from a young age, but I was never the type of teenager to sit and like really love making stuff on the computer. I liked playing with other people and I liked playing live. You know, my technical tools of production are very minimal. The institution I went to study music post-secondary didn't really prioritize that. And I wish I had, because right now I'm in my 30s and when I have to do a recording from home, I can do it. I've done many of them. It just takes me a long time because I'm not fast on the computer, right? So, and I feel like that anxiety also translates when I'm sitting in a booth by myself in a studio, where this sort of thing is a nice in between, where these last two albums I'm done. And the next one, I really need to do it in a studio again. Like these last two, they sound great, but like what I have planned for my quintet's recording, I need to be in I need the isolation thing. However, this is like, because you're just playing, nobody's got headphones on, you're in the same room. It feels like you're playing live, but you can stop.
Yeah.
And, you know, the only person that's got headphones on is the engineer. And then, you know, he had headphones running so that we could check how it sounded, but, you know, we had everything off, you know, and I think it's really beautiful to record like that because it feels more like you're just playing.
Can you tell me a little bit about the role mentorship has played in your development? You know, it's so important in this tradition.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how the different mentorship relationships you've had show up in the different contexts you work in. Like, can you draw a thread? Is there lineage there for you that you're conscious of?
Yeah, I think so. Mentorship can go in a few different ways, you know, and I think a lot of people, especially in the city I live in Toronto, complain about a lack of mentorship, and particularly in the jazz world, of a lack of mentorship. I think for me, I went and sought out some mentorship upon graduating from an undergraduate degree. I really wanted to move to New York. It just did not make financial sense for me to move to New York to pursue a career as a saxophone player. I'd already moved to Toronto, which is the big city in Canada, right? Like I grew up in the capital and I moved 5 hours away and had no family here. And I was overwhelmed by the prospect of moving to the United States at the time. So the decision I made was I found a teacher in New York that I liked, and I was lucky enough that I knew I had a couple connections where I had couches to crash on. So from like the time I was 22 until I was 27, like for 5 years, I would go down twice a year to see a teacher named Mark Shim. You know, I probably only saw him 7 or 8 times, but each of those times were very profound. And particularly the first time, he kind of broke me down and then rebuilt me back up and was like, this is what you need to focus on, right? And I'd been warned that this guy was like no other teacher that I'd ever experienced. And, you know, because I saw him twice a year and just so infrequently for so long, from in a very formative period of my 20s. And these lessons were always like, he was always very generous with his time because he knew I was coming from far away. And I think about his generosity and like, you know, the fact that I got to sit, beside somebody who had played with Elvin Jones and Betty Carter as a young man, who plays with Vijay Iyer and all these heroes of mine. And he was that generous with his time. And like, from his standpoint, the main lesson he really taught me about the saxophone is that it should be thought of as a rhythmic instrument. And a lot of people don't think of it as a rhythmic instrument. So every single time, particularly from an articulation standpoint, like right? Like his whole thing is trying to make the way he plays on the saxophone sound more like a drummer, or like Max Roach on a snare drum. Like that level of precision when it comes to rhythmic articulation is the basis of all Black American music, right? Like push and pull, swing, like rhythm. And so I think a lot about Mark, like on a day-to-day basis, because I did not take that many lessons with him, but it was very generous with his time. Where I see a lineage where he, in his case, he was mentored by people older than him. And so despite him being hard, he was generous with his time with me. And I was not that good. The first time I went to see him, like, I thought I was good, and then I was told I had a lot of work left to do.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And then, I've had a couple experiences recently where, in the last year and a half, I've done a bunch of playing with Dave Young, who is the former bass player for Oscar Peterson, who's in his mid 80s here in Toronto. And Dave's hired me to do a bunch of stuff. He played with everyone and really old school, and you can hear the whole history of the music. And through working with him, a similar sense of like, let's go, like on the bandstand could be hard, but also like deeply caring about the future of the music. And from a guy that is 55 years older than me, right? A couple generations above me. And, various teachers I've had over the years. Even I think like mentorship, like there's a couple musicians like, Lowell, I like to use the term jazz generations to refer to people like I think they were in eras of like 5 to 7 years. Like that's a jazz generation. Where like Lowell is the jazz generation above me. I'm 30. Lowell, I think, is like 35, 36 or something. So like when I moved to Toronto as a 19-year-old, he was already established and gigging. He was in his mid 20s, right? And, getting even like when I first started playing with Lowell, I was a bit younger and more inexperienced, and he had played a million gigs. And when you play with a drummer who's spent like thousands of hours on the bandstand playing time, it feels different, right? Because they're very solid. Where I think about that mentorship a lot as well, of just like people in my life that have really gone out of their way to help me. And, I've gone out of my way to ask them questions and bug them. But yeah, I think about that a lot, especially when it comes to like what I'm doing artistically and just continuing to do it, right? I think I heard this quote from Jeff Coffin, who was told it by Sonny Rollins, where the forces that Sonny Rollins was being asked in a group context, what advice would you have for younger musicians coming up today? And this was in like 2012, near the end of Sonny's playing career. Sonny responded really articulately from what Jeff told me, which is, the forces that have always tried to squash creativity, and it is up to the artist to push back against that. Where I think, just continuing to create and do the thing, like, is kind of an act of rebellion. I think about that a lot in the context of mentorship, of like, okay, I better keep going and keep treating this seriously because I had these people who believed in me, who gave me the time of day when they didn't need to give me the time of day. Yeah. And every single time I go to play, I do think about that.
I've talked to a lot of people who have had mentorship experiences with Dave Liebman.
Yeah.
It's always funny to hear. He kicks people's asses. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with Lieb. Lieb was like up at the University of Toronto quite a bit when I was there, and I got to spend quite a bit of one-on-one time with him, and it was great. Even just being around the guy, just like that level of intensity.
Yeah. Well, and you talked earlier about, it's like, where does the saxophone go in that sort of post-Coltrane world? And I think he was a pivotal figure in opening up, or pointing, like, making it possible again, like to say the saxophone has not reached the end.
Correct.
And I think that if for nothing else, he was an important figure for that.
Yeah. I 100% agree. Yeah. I'm very grateful I got to spend a bunch of time with him. And I mean, even like his book on saxophone, developing a personal saxophone sound, like he has his harmony book about that. He breaks down what him and Steve Grossman were doing when they played with Elvin Jones and how they were approaching playing outside. But man, his book on developing tone on saxophone is unbelievable. It is just like, and it exists in a post-Coltrane world. And it has like, at this point, that book, the Eddie Harris book, which is also an extensive guide to playing the saxophone and developing the saxophone, those both exist in a post-Coltrane world. And I find like I've owned both those books for so many years and I give them to students and it's just, yeah, I don't think we're at the end at all. And I think a big part of that is, yeah, like these guys, like, yeah, like Liebman, another guy is Winton, just like this relentless drive of educating people and just showing them, hey, let's push, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, is it a quintet project that you had sitting on the shelf or that you wanted to get back to?
Yeah. I have a full quintet thing that I have all the tunes written. I have a plan. I just brought up a fabulous piano player from New York, one of the guiding lights of his generation on the instrument, Lex Corton. Plays with a variety of people. He plays with Melissa Aldana. He plays with Tyshawn Sori. He plays with a million of the like next gen New York guys. And he's a brilliant piano player that I've been a fan of for many years.
Mm-hmm.
He recently came up and we did 2 quite successful nights playing the music and I recorded them and they sound pretty good. And yeah, it's kind of that quintet project that I'm hoping to get recorded like at the end of this year, early next year. And hopefully with Lex, because I think he just colored the music brilliantly. You know, it's kind of all the songs are based off of places. And I spent after I finished my university degree, I was lucky enough, I like joined this kind of fun party funk disco rap. And it was this crazy like 10-piece band that like extensively toured. Like I think in 3 years being in that band, I did 200 gigs across Canada and the US. Like we were just doing a million shows, the hippie circuit. And it was amazing as a young musician. And I learned so much just like being on the road like that and doing these rough tours and having all these experiences in these places. And I kind of, you know, wrote 8-9 tunes about different places and particularly within Canada. It's essentially a full record, and it's kind of details me kind of growing up in my 20s and just kind of becoming a musician and like becoming a man in some senses. Where like, and just all these profound realizations I had while on tour and being on the road and like what that does to the mind and like what that did for my thinking about music and like what is important in music. And that's what this quintet record is about. And I'm really excited about it. And I hope to record it soon.
Other than how all experiences sort of, you know, interact internally and interface with each other and shape each other, are there any like more overt or obvious ways to you that like maybe working on the trio project will now inform the quintet project, or like, is there a connective tissue through your work, or is this just like, these are discrete projects?
I think, you know, I do have some definitive themes in what I do as an artist. The main theme is, you know, I really like music that breaks boundaries and combines things in an interesting way and pushes forward. You know, I think for a lack of a better way to explain it in music, we have like neoclassical things and avant-garde things, right? Avant-garde can be, we can use the term avant-garde, like bebop was avant-garde, right? Like, you know, Black Sabbath was avant-garde, you know? And I've always been more drawn to this music that I love swing, and it's hard for me because I like doing everything, but I've always been drawn, like the records that really make me just go, whoa, are these ones that push forward. So I think with everything I do, I kind of have this sense of like, you know, I mean, a great Dave Liebman quote that he told me was, you know, what you want to do is you want to be able to put your album up on your shelf next to the albums of your heroes and be proud of it and, think that it does them justice. And that has always stuck to me. And that's kind of a guiding light what I do. And I, just trying to balance the full spectrum of human emotion within music. And to have just some honest expression, even though, I think it would be a lot easier if I focus more on one thing. It would be a bit easier to market it. But, as it stands now, I have this weird collection of recordings that I've released that are very different in scope, but the thing that combines them is that they're different.
That's incredible. It also seems like a hallmark of the Toronto scene. There's that. Yeah, you used the word avant-garde, and I guess that blending or that thirst for not novelty, but innovation. I don't know. I don't know the right word to use, but that seems to be a mark of the Toronto scene, is that people are. Maybe it's because there's so many working musicians who have to go off and play in other contexts that when they come back, their music is just slightly left to center.
I would describe it as such. I mean, I went to New York a million times, and then shortly before Trump won that election, I was lucky enough where I went down to Nashville for a week, and I got to hang a bit with Jeff Coffin and see the Nashville jazz scene. And that's the only place in the US I've been to where I was like, I would love to live here. I would love to exist here, because it reminded me of Toronto, but was smaller, and there were more touring opportunities with bigger name artists in the US. Everybody in that jazz scene was so killing, and they worked in such a wide variety of contexts. And when they wrote original music, it reflected that. And everybody was cool with other people, with doing other stuff. And I think the reason I like Toronto is I can go and show up to a straight ahead jam session and sound great, and nobody's going to be weirded out that I was coming from a rock gig. And I don't think I'm going to get vibed out for that. I think in general, people are pretty supportive, and I love New York, but in New York, it really feels like you kind of have to decide what type of jazz musician you're going to be.
Interesting.
So I've never fully lived there, but every single time I've been there and hung with people there, I think there's just so many musicians you can spend. And that's what makes New York great. It's there's so many musicians that you can spend an entire lifetime playing, for example, the Latin jazz thing in New York, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable, the level and the lineage of that music. And people just can really just work in that context. Even within the realm of free jazz, there's so many different niche pockets of that, and it's beautiful and crazy. But, I think I like doing everything, which is why, and I think you're right. I think when me doing all this working musician work, when I go to do my own thing, I bring kind of that energy and some of those influences into what I do.
Thank you so much, Patrick Smith. And thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, I think you'll like at least one of the more than nearly 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, join our mailing list or consider becoming a paid supporter. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant, and our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.